My name is Kathryn Rowan Rapp, and I was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, about 30 miles northwest of Boston, in 1951, in a working class family. So I grew up in a community outside of the city of Lowell, which is where I was born. It's called Billerica, and it was an old mill town. So we lived in one of the old mill houses, and it was called Garden City. It was behind the woolen mills. I grew up as one of 4 and then 5 children in a house with 1 bathroom, 7 people, like so many other people. My sister Sue, my brother Bill, my brother Bob, me, my brother Sean, and my mother and my father. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my father was a pharmacist. And as I said, it was a very working class neighborhood. We all got jobs pretty young. And I was the 4th of 5. Then there was a 10-year hiatus, and my youngest brother was born. And my mother had a lot of problems. She had mental illness, and she was committed to a facility several times, and so my dad had this newborn, and we all kind of helped take care of him. But my brother and I, my older brother and I, were living at home, and we just said, it's time to go, we got to make it on our own. They have other fish to fry here, so. And then I went to a private girls' school for a couple of years, and then my mom got sick, and so I transferred to a public high school, which was really good because I had a wonderful counselor there who counseled me about where to go to school for nursing. My parents were in the hospital corps in World War II, and so I was interested in medicine, kind of related things. I had my father's old medic book, so I used to look at my father's medic book and got very interested in what I was finding in it. And so the counselor counseled me to go to a state school, which was just opening a nursing program with a bachelor's in nursing. So I went to a state school. I was very lucky. It was $100 a semester. So I was able to work and pay for that with some help from scholarship money to finish my senior year. I'd formed lifelong friendships that I still have to this day, people I graduated from nursing school with. And then I moved into Boston and worked in Boston, Tufts New England Medical Center. And then at 74, Joe came to Boston, and I met Joe, and we began our life together in 1974. We met in the hospital. I was a nurse, and he was a surgical resident at the time. And I called him to see a patient who was having surgery and who was very frightened. And he came and he saw the patient. It was about 2 in the morning. I was working the night shift. And he was very kind to this man. It brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. Because Joe was so kind to this man who was very frightened. He was having surgery the next day, and Joe sat down and made sure there wasn't anything medically wrong with him. And then he just sat and chatted with him and talked to him and took care of his anxiety. And I thought, what a kind man. I need to know who he is. So that's how we met. And then we worked together and developed a relationship over time. And that was in Boston. And I was there from 73 to 79. We were there during the blizzard of 78, which was a memorable event. We were 3 miles from downtown Boston. He put his cross-country skis on, and he had a bag filled with almost all the food we had in the house because he didn't know when he'd get home. Shoveling for days to get out of that. It was just amazing. We shoveled our street so the snowplow could get into it. When my mother passed, it was 1977, which was the year Joe and I got married. We decided to get married because we knew she was going to die. She had cancer. It was pretty advanced. And we had no plans for any kind of big wedding. And then we said, well, why don't we have a wedding and have all the family there so she can see everybody and have the wedding she wants, because it really doesn't matter to us. So we got married in March, and she was dead in June. I wasn't very close to my mother. I was closer to my dad, but I had an aunt who had died precipitously not too long before that, and that was my first experience of loss. She died. She went in the hospital for one test, and she died. She had some kind of reaction, and she died. That was my first real kind of close witness of grief, was my Aunt Pauline. Not so much my mother. My mother she was a hole, and I knew she was gone, but she wasn't physically present or mentally present. She wasn't mentally present. So Pauline was mentally right there for me. So it was a big loss for me. But that was in 1977. Well, my father was a very bright man who didn't really have a chance to go to school, to do the things that he could have done. He was in the service, and then he studied on his own with a private tutor and passed the state exam for pharmacy without any formal education. And he was very quick thinking, very good with numbers, I think he would have really taken off like a bottle rocket and been a lawyer or a physician or given the opportunity. But he wasn't given the opportunity. That wasn't his calling. And he made the most of what he had. But what I remember from my dad is quick wit, good humor, he was funny, and a dedication to the family. You know, he'd come home every Thursday, was his night to cook. I'd go shopping with him, he'd do the food shopping. We'd make the rounds. And he was a family man. So that's what I remember about my dad. I think what my dad influenced in me was a sense of right or wrong, was a sense of hard work, honesty, integrity, and a sense of humor, and a sense that hard work and taking care of yourself was the way to go. Joe had a very serious illness in '79. He had an eye infection in his brain and he could have died. So I think we valued life before then, but we valued it even more after that. He survived and moved to Oregon, which was home for him, and I went with him. I mean, that fast forwards so much of my life. We moved to Portland, and I started school immediately. I went to summer school and was taking 5 days a week of physics and doing pre-med courses in Oregon. I joined Portland State University there, City University, and took classes there all summer and then continued them during the year. And Joe's mother entered the picture in '74 as a very influential maternal figure for me. She is Joe's mom. Amy was very supportive. She knew people who were the pre-med advisors who she connected me to. She was someone who was striking in that when I talked, she listened. She looked at me. She was intent on listening to what I had to say. She was interested in what I had to say. She was interested in me as a person. And I think she influenced me positively throughout the 25 years I knew her before she died. I was very fortunate to know Joe's mom. And so in Oregon, we lived close by. And when we lived in Oregon, and then I went to medical school. I started medical school in 1981 in Oregon at OHSU. And although I officially graduated from OHSU, in 1983 I started taking a lot of courses at UCSF and transferring the credit to OHSU, which they don't allow now and didn't allow before then, but they allowed me to do. They said it was too much administrative paperwork, but I was allowed to do it because Joe had gone to San Francisco in 1983 to do a fellowship. So that brings us to medical school, and I graduated from medical school in 1985. I went to Oregon Health Sciences University, and then I did an internship in Kaiser on Geary Boulevard here in San Francisco. I did a medicine internship for a year, and then took a year off. I worked as an emergency room doctor, and we adopted our first child, Ainsley. And so I was what's called outside of the match. You won matches to go into medical training, and I was outside of the match for anesthesia. So I was to start in January of '87, but daughter was born in January of '87. So I called and asked if I could postpone that. And they said, well, you could postpone for 6 months, or would you rather postpone for 12 months? I said 12 months. So I postponed for 12 months and started in 1988. So Ainsley was almost a year old when I started my training. During that year, I took an intense language course at UC Berkeley to learn a little Spanish, because I thought that would be handy for me to have. And I stayed home, took care of Ainsley, and I worked as an ER doc. Moonlighted at Kaiser in South City. Well, I was not trained completely. I was just a moonlighter, somebody who filled in the spot with other people. The reason I moved from nursing to be a physician, there were 6 friends, and we all went through nursing school at the same time. And we all decided to leave the jobs that we were doing and pursue advanced education. And I decided that medical school was there for me. I had always wanted to do that first, but I didn't. I read a book about Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first woman physician in the United States, in the 7th grade. And that's what I wanted to do. But when I got into high school and looked, at trying to go to medical school and do all these things, I couldn't even write a check. I didn't even know how to do that. But I learned how to do all of that. And it was just easier to take the route of becoming a nurse at that time. And I loved my nursing. I have no regrets that I was a nurse first, none. And then I became a physician. The friends that I mentioned earlier, they all became nurse practitioners or got their master's in nursing, and then I began doing all the pre-med courses that were required at that time. So that kind of led me along the path. Joe's mother was very, very supportive of doing that, because that's the decision that I had already made. Once I made the decision, Joe was very supportive about it. He didn't want any part of the decision. He didn't want any responsibility in the decision. He said, "This is your decision, not mine. I can't make it for you." So I talked to a woman who was a surgeon when I was a nurse at Tufts. Her name is Ann Lowry. And Ann and I talked about it, and Ann said, "Well, I don't understand why, if this is what you want to do, you're not going to do it." So a lot of people gave me permission to do what it was that I wanted to do and to go to medical school. It wasn't easy. I had to go to college for 7 years to get into medical school. I went for a total of 7 years and got on, because I had to get all my requirements and get another degree and get my CUME up and be competitive and take the entrance exams and so forth. So it wasn't an easy road, but it was what I wanted to do. I don't know, I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. 8 different schools I went to. And I took classes wherever I needed to take the class, and however I needed to do it to fit into my work schedule. That's what I did. So I took some at night, some during the day, some at different universities and so forth. So that's how I became a physician. But the nursing, I worked as a nurse for 10 years, and it was wonderful. It was a wonderful time. It was a very good thing I did. I'm very glad I did it that way. Well, Joe moved in '83, and I had to go back and forth for the next 2 years and do some courses up in Oregon and some courses here. So we went back and forth. So Joe and I were separated by careers, in that he worked an hour south of where we lived, and he had to be on call, so he had to live down there. And so we did a lot of jockeying during that time in our relationship. We had gone through IVF, and unsuccessfully. We had always wanted to have a family, and it wasn't possible for us to do it without help. And the IVF process wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is now. Nothing like it is now. And so we completed the process and had eggs planted once. And I had some congenital abnormalities. Joe had some abnormalities, and together it was pretty unlikely we were going to be able to have biologic children. So we looked into adoption, and we adopted our first child, Ainsley, who's right there on the table. And Ainsley, we adopted from the nursery in Boise, Idaho. She was 4 days old, and we decided that that was a priority at the time. So we made that a priority. And that's when I took time off from training. And I no regrets at all about that. And then we found out about the second child that we adopted. Ainsley was 4.5, 5. And Blaine we found out about through a babysitter whose friend had a baby to adopt. And these were all open adoptions. And the people who were supposed to adopt this baby got cold feet about open adoption. And we were all set. We'd gone through the process, which is a very arduous, very long process. And we got him when he was 2 weeks old from Boulder, Colorado. And he was in foster care because that's a requirement of Colorado. But then once you leave Colorado, the child is yours. There's no going back. So we left Colorado with Blaine, who was 2 weeks old. And then the third child, who's also over there, Kaylin, we adopted. He was 4 months old. And again, we found out about him through friends. And we knew he was a drug-exposed baby. We knew he was an at-risk baby, and we thought we'd be okay with that because we had the resources to help him. And he has been our most challenging child, I think, because of his challenges, because of the exposure in utero that happened to him. But that's Kaylin, and he's now 28. So they're all adopted. And in the midst of all of this, our godson moved in with us when Ainsley was 3, was a professional dancer with the San Francisco Ballet, and lived with us and became part of the family as his parents died very young, and he's a part of our family now today. We have extended family, and we have more extended family, and we have the family's friends, and the kids' friends, and the family grows and grows and grows. And family is the nuclear family, of course, but then it extends way beyond that to the other members of the family who mean a lot to us. Joe's family and my family, and we have a lot of family members who are very, very important to us and have been very supportive throughout the process and continue to be very supportive today. They're there for us, which is very important. You know, it's a unique situation in my family. The kids kind of took care of each other because my father was very involved in taking care of my mother and taking care of this young child who was 10 years younger than I was, and having to find care for him and having to deal with my mother's erratic behavior and having to deal with all of those things. The kids then, the other remaining siblings, kind of took care of each other in my family, which was one thing that Joe oftentimes noted when he met our family, is how we all took care of each other. My poor sister babysat us all. It has continued and grown. Yes, my siblings were all here individually. They all visited me, and we lost one of them 3 years ago. But the other 3 remaining siblings have all come and visited. And it continues. We continue to have a Zoom meeting and continue to Zoom every week now. Well, the way that I would say we've influenced our children since we moved to the West Coast was more through the influence of Joe's family and cousins that were not really cousins. They called themselves cousins, but they were more second cousins, but it didn't matter. And doing family events. Family was always, what we always have said is, family is what you have. Family is what you do. Family takes care of each other. And family is very important. Being physicians and having these children was a challenge. I decreased my clinical commitment quite a bit for about 8 years, took a big cut in salary in order to do it, have no regrets that I did that, so that I could have more flexibility in my schedule to make sure that school events were attended, that participation happened at school events. We were very present at school events and very present at children's important events, and made it very clear to them that that was, family is really important. And in 1975, I was working as a nurse, and the hospital overhired nurses, and I was able to take the summer off without pay, with a guaranteed to go back to work at Tufts New England Medical Center as a nurse, and I spent 3 months doing the European thing with the backpack, and traveled all around Europe for 3 months with friends, and it was just wonderful. Wonderful opportunity to get to do that. We didn't go as far north as Scandinavia. We didn't go as far east as Turkey. We didn't go to Greece, but we went everywhere else. We went to Naples and Capri, and we went through the Alps and through Zermatt, and we went and we hiked up in the Alps, and we just went everywhere. We went to England and Ireland and Scotland. The last 3 weeks we traveled there, but we traveled everywhere. We walked and we walked and we walked, and we met some lovely people, because one of the women I traveled with, her dad had been part of the French resistance in World War II and had known a young man who was a Frenchman who was part of the French resistance, Louis. And so Louis and Janine lived in the Alpes Maritime, which was above the Riviera. And we had a wonderful visit with them. They couldn't do enough for us. It was just wonderful. And Joe and I subsequently went and met them in Brittany. They had a place up in Brittany as well. And we did that, I guess, well, that was after we were married. And we visited them again. So it was just a wonderful kind of experience for us. Wonderful. Put a backpack on, go stay in a youth hostel and go. Without any kids, just go. Yeah, it was wonderful. So that was in '75. How I decided to land on my specialty is rather vague. I had always liked the operating room. Because I was older when I started medical school, I was 30 when I started medical school, I thought that years of surgical training would be too long. I would be too old when I finished. And so I tried to choose a specialty that was I liked being in the operating room. I had been a critical care nurse. I liked that aspect of care, the critical care aspect. And I did a rotation, and I did well in the rotation. And I received a letter from a gentleman with whom I worked, saying that I was one of the best, but not the best, students with whom he had worked. And I was then given the recommendation to go. And at the same time, I was offered a job at Brigham and Women's by Ben Covino to do my training in Boston. So it was a decision point for us, because we had decided that it was, I guess it was my turn to make the decision about where we were going to go next, because we had decided to take turns by then. And so I decided to stay at UCSF rather than go back to Boston and train at the Brigham. And how I got into the specialty, I still don't know. I mean, the first day that I walked in, I thought, oh, this is incredible. I've made a terrible mistake. You know, I have no idea what I'm doing. But it developed into being a wonderful career. I did so many different things within my specialty. I am so lucky to have done what I've done. Well, I'm an anesthesiologist, but I'm a specific cardiac anesthesiologist. So I learned to take care of adults and children who have heart problems, either acquired or congenital heart disease, who need surgery. And I learned to do that during a fellowship, which was pretty intense. And the learning did not end when I finished my fellowship. It continued intensely for at least the first 5 years that I did the job. But for the first 5 years, my practice was very different because it was early enough. It was in '91, and we did everything. There were no specialty thoracic cases. There were no specialty vascular cases. There were no specialty. There were cardiac cases, but we did all of them at the time. So we were a very busy service, and it was very challenging. And we did children and we did adults, and it was a big, big step in my career. And in 2008, then we split into two separate groups, pediatrics and adults. And I chose to go into the pediatric group at that time. So I focused more on pediatrics, but I always took care of adults. And then in 2012, I left. After 22 years, I worked at Parnassus. It was harder to stay for me than it was to leave, so I left. And I went and I worked at Mount Zion, I worked at the VA in Martinez, I worked at the VA in San Francisco, and I worked at Kaiser in San Francisco as a cardiac anesthesiologist. And it was a very interesting time. I did that from 2012, and then I rejoined the faculty in 2015. And I rejoined the faculty when Mission Bay opened, and I rejoined it on the adult side and worked with a wonderful man, Spencer Yost. And I said to him, how can I help? And he said, you can come and you can be a senior member of the team over here. So I did, and he welcomed me. And that was in 2015, and then I rejoined the faculty, as I said, in 2015, and was going along great, and then was hit by a car on my bicycle in November 21st of 2016, and sustained 5 broken bones, was injured, and was out for quite a while. And then I came back from that injury, and a surgeon with whom I had worked before was rehired by UCSF. And so then I went to focus on pediatric cardiac once again. But in the interim, at Parnassus, from 2005 to 2010, I had been the medical director of the Prepare Clinic. So I had worked in the cardiac ORs, but I also worked in a clinic and ran the clinic as the medical director and directed 16 nurse practitioners at the time. And so it was a big job. And that's, wow. And then I focused on kids for the last part of my career. And then I was diagnosed in November of 2021 and then quit officially in March of 2022. I think it was March of 2022. That's when I officially ended. But then I was learning to be a coach at the time of my diagnosis. And I was learning to be a faculty coach. And I was supported by my department chair to do this. And I was doing training with one other woman. And I completed the training. Despite my chemo, I completed the training and became the first faculty coach in the department and had the privilege of coaching for 1 year. Or actually, I began that coaching in November of 2023. I coached for a full year as a recall faculty member, and I was the first department coach. Very proud of that. And since then, there are now 10 more people training in the same program I trained in to become coaches in the department. The thing I think I'm most proud of is my relationship with the people with whom I worked, and the nurses with whom I worked in particular. I think because I had been a nurse before I became a physician, I understood things from their perspective in ways that other people didn't. I was a nurse liaison in many situations, and I think the thing I'm most proud of, and the thing that I have read about, there have been comments that keep talking about the kindness and the calmness and the patience and the respect and the mentorship that I offered that I wasn't aware of offering. And I have letters and comments from people that I trained 20 years ago that talk about this. And I'm just so, well, I'm not supposed to touch, but I am so touched by it as I read it. And so honored to read these words, that it's wonderful. What Joe said was he often asks the surgeons or gets an opinion from the surgeons about my skill as an anesthesiologist. And the surgeons say that if they had an anesthesiologist taking care of them, they would want it to be me, which is really a supreme compliment coming from their perspective. Supreme compliment. And in gratitude, I hear those words because I'm humble, but I'm not brain dead. I know I have skills, and I know I'm respected for my skills, but I have worked very hard for those skills. And my work ethic has come through with me. My work ethic as a parent, my work ethic as a colleague, my work ethic as a friend. One of the additional comments that were made by the surgeons was that when I was in the Prepare Clinic, when I was in the operating room, when I was taking care of the patient, I was a fierce advocate for the patient. And oftentimes I would know the patient better than the surgeons did, which was unusual because many of the surgeons were very, very bright and thorough. And I would be able to have conversations with them about the patients because I knew the patients very well. And I made it my job to know as much about that patient as the next person in the room, if not more, because I considered it important. And I had a contribution to make, and I had a responsibility to that patient to know as much about them as possible so that I could take good care of them. I have not given up. I am tenacious, and I get the tenacity from my dad. And I'm tenacious in my death. You know, I'm at peace. Do I want to die? No. Am I going to die? Yes. Are we all going to die? Yes. I am of the nature to die. I am of the nature to grow old. I am of the nature to become ill. And I am of the nature to say goodbye to people who love and care for me. And I am responsible for my decisions and my actions that I make. And those are the Buddhist recommendations, and I live by that. And dying is part of death and part of living. It's part of the process, and I'm peaceful I'm at peace with it. I'm tearful because I have a lot of emotion. And the most important thing is the love that you would leave people as a legacy. The legacy of love and caring, truly caring for the people around you. My children, my children are my life and my love. Joe is the love of my life. We've been very lucky. We say we've won the lottery because we've met each other. That I want them all to be okay, because I'm going to be okay. That I'll come back as an osprey or something wild and wonderful in nature. And that I want them to be okay. I want them to be happy. I want them to live a full life. And I want them to love and respect and be kind to other people. Having yoga in my life since the early 60s and being a yoga practitioner and trying to learn to meditate and trying to have peaceful moments in my life and being more aware of Buddhism of late and fitting into it. You know, Enver and I chant together and it's wonderful. And we have guided meditations and we have meditations together and we share poems and it's very enriching. And, you know, my legacy is, you know, who's going to hold the family together? Who's going to be the glue to hold the family together? And they're going to have to do that without me. And they can do it. I think the most important thing I want to capture is how important my family, my friends, and my colleagues have been in my life. I do not have the words to articulate the importance of the people in my life and the many, many kind and considerate and lovely people that I have encountered throughout my life, and how lucky I've been to know as many wonderful people as I have known who have loved and cared for me the way that I've loved and cared for them, and how lucky I've been to have had reciprocity. And my legacy is that I will never stop loving. That's never going to go away. I told my children it's in their heart ever since they were babies, and that's where it's going to stay. And all the people that I know. And that's where I get it back.